Okay, let's get to our introductions. First, on my immediate right, for you on the right side as well, is David Althouse. Dave is an '04 graduate of CSU. He works at KDVR TV Fox 31 in Denver, where he is the chief photographer. He's also the main sport shooter. And if you look up there in that image, that I've got that big arrow because you can't really see him. He's not that small a person, but around the Denver Broncos he tends to be. So there he is in the middle of everything, shooting a Bronco game, which he does quite a bit of. He has had numerous National Press Photographer of the Year awards. That means when you win those awards, that means you're talking about the best press photography really on Earth, because we really do have some of the best journalists and video journalists on the planet. You ever think about it that way, Dave? But you can now. Yeah, no, you will from now on. He has won 7 Emmy Awards, 3 just this year alone, which is absolutely amazing. Some people work their whole career, never win any Emmy Awards at all. And one thing I want to mention as well, and a lot of people don't realize, is that David is an Eagle Scout. And how many Eagle Scouts here? Anybody? Yes. Okay, well, you guys are in that club. And this is the picture they took right after he was given that final badge to win Eagle Scout. He's got a really great sense of humor. He's got a good sports eye, but he's also capable of doing some fantastic work. I mean, we know this from the Emmy Awards in terms of his feature stories and the hard news stories that he does. And in fact, this story last year was nominated for a number of awards, and it dealt with the miraculous situation surrounding Flight 232, which crashed in Sioux City, Iowa, I believe, about 25 years ago. And usually in a crash like that, it doesn't turn out so well. But miraculously, quite a few people lived. And in fact, it was quite a few children from Colorado. And I just want to show you maybe a minute of that introduction. Let's take a look.
25 years ago this weekend.
I have serious doubts about making the airport. Unless we get control of this airplane, we're going to put it down wherever it happens to be.
Their stories of survival.
There were 298 people on board, including the number in the crew. There are some survivors.
Put your arms around my neck, hold me real tight, and put your head against mine, because we're gonna get out of here.
The plane left Denver at 12:45 p.m. local time for Chicago, but something went wrong.
The flight loaded with dozens of children.
I can remember picking up a little baby and carrying the baby out of the plane.
Young kids from Colorado whose lives would be forever changed.
I can't imagine what my mom felt like, not knowing if I was okay.
A look at how the moment of impact has had a lasting impact on the children of Flight 232.
And David was telling me right before class that, we look at something like that and think, oh, that's neat. They spent some weeks and months working on this. And in fact, they did it just in a matter of days and hours. I mean, it's just had to get it together. You get it together fast. They're driving back from places, actually editing on the fly. And we can talk a little bit about that. It's not always easy to pull these things together. Our other guest to my far right is David Freed. He's a 76 grad of this program. He's a former investigative journalist for the Los Angeles Times and a Pulitzer Prize winner. And that was for a team coverage of the LA riots, which took place after the Rodney King verdict. And he almost outright won a Pulitzer Prize just by himself in terms of the kind of police reporting that he was doing and investigations that he was doing. He also commonly writes for national magazines like Smithsonian's Air and Space, as well as The Atlantic. He, on top of that, is a Hollywood screenwriter, and he has written for a dozen different studios and television networks. And also he's an author of the Cordell Logan series of mystery thriller novels. Oh, it's something I was going to show you. Here's an image that he's got when he's was on his way to Desert Storm in 2003. So he's aboard this helicopter, I think flying into the LaSalle, USS LaSalle, to the LaSalle. And so he was on assignment in the Middle East for a lot of the war coverage and a lot of the unrest that was happening there as well. But I wanted to say something about, he's a novelist. So somehow in the midst of all this, he finds ways to write this series of books about Cordell Logan. These are mystery thriller novels. On top of this, he's worked with the CIA and done a lot of military work. He has top secret clearance. And that gives him a whole bunch of information about how to inject, I think, a lot of authentic information in these books. They're really fun to read. And on top of it, Cordell Logan is a pilot. And I wanted to show you, there's the series of books right there. And David flies as well. And you know, my dad was a private pilot, so I flew quite a bit. And this comes through in his books. That this idea of this guy being a pilot seems real, it seems authentic. So it really adds to this. This is near where he lives in California. Okay. And so here's how this is going to go. I'll kind of start off with a few questions, but kind of think about some questions that you might have for these folks. You know, especially based on what they're saying here, just to go ahead and reflect and react a little bit. I'm going to unplug this so we get a little less feedback. And, but I'm going to start off asking you guys, and you can decide who wants to take this first. Maybe we'll say David Althouse. When you were sitting in media and society, believe that you would one day be sitting up here as a panelist because of all the awards that you won?
Well, at that time I hadn't won any awards yet.
Okay.
It's different when you're a student. And you're kind of like, okay, you see these speakers come up, and you're like, you know, they've worked hard. What can I do to work hard to be them and be in a good position in the future? And that's what kind of really comes down to is kind of the people you meet and what you can make into that experience. And it's not easy. I mean, there's nothing easy about the careers that we have taken at all. A lot of ups, a lot of downs, a lot of long hours, long days. But to answer your question, yeah, I really thought so. I knew what it was going to take. It was going to take some time. I wouldn't do anything different. You guys are in a great position here at CSU. You have all the tools you need, and it's kind of really up to you guys to make the best of it.
And I'm going to say one more thing, because I did mention, David, that you worked at student media all 4 years, especially in television. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I had a pretty good idea when I was a freshman that I wanted to be in TV. I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do, maybe producing, photography, talk about maybe a little on-air stuff. But I knew that this was a good place to do that because I could start getting that experience day one. And in this industry, in this business, it's all about experience. And if you can start from the beginning, you have a leg up over everybody else.
David Freed, when you were sitting in media in society, were you thinking, yeah, I can't wait to be sitting at that panel as a big-time award winner, including the Pulitzer Prize?
No, not really. I came to CSU as a biology major, and with kind of a notional idea that I would be a doctor, and then realized very quickly after my freshman year that my GPA was never going to get me into med school. So, but I never really wanted to be a doctor anyway. I didn't actually, to be honest with you, know what I wanted to do in life. And anybody live in Westfall Hall? Westfall? I lived in Westfall. And I remember sitting in my dorm room one night, flipping through the course catalog, trying to figure out what I was going to do with my life. And this was after having taken a year of organic and inorganic chemistry and a whole biology series and some pretty hard math classes. And then I came to what was then called technical journalism. And I looked at the requirements for the degree, of which I had already met many of what I thought were the hardest, and I thought, hey, journalism, maybe I could be a journalist. And at that moment, and this is honest truth, I had an English teacher in high school who had pulled me aside after class and who knew that I was sort of focusing on math and science, and she'd said, you know, you should really think about going into writing. You have an aptitude in that area. And literally at that moment, her image popped into my head, and I thought, well, maybe that's what I'll do. So I didn't have any real hard and fast concept that someday, years later, I would be sitting here. I actually teach here now. But what I did realize was that journalism for me boded the potential of a lot of excitement and a lot of fun and a lot of opportunities to go places and to see things that I wouldn't have been able to do otherwise. And so to echo what Dave just said about establishing relationships, meeting people that ultimately will help facilitate your ambitions professionally, all of that is important. When I look back on my career, I would say that a lot of it was sort of being in the right place at the right time. But you make your own luck in this world, and a lot of being in the right place at the right time, I think, was as an end result of the passion that I felt and still feel for journalism, and my energy, not so much my ambitions, because those were not really clearly formed. I just knew that I wanted to be a newspaper reporter, and from that initial ambition has evolved all kinds of different career opportunities, all of which I have found to be really exciting and very rewarding.
David, how do you feel? Do you feel people could follow your path, David Althouse, follow your path and then become what you've become, or do they have to be doing something different?
No, there's definitely opportunities out there. Journalism isn't what it was yesterday, wasn't what it was 10 years ago, wasn't what it was 20 years ago. It's a changing field. You kind of really got to know you got to kind of know a lot about a little. You got to know how to write. You got to know how to produce. You got to know how to shoot. You got to know how to edit. You got to know how to communicate. Social media is a big thing these days. So yeah, it's possible. It's a lot of hard work, but it's definitely possible. David Freed?
Yeah, I would concur. You'll hear a lot, for those of you that are new to the program, you'll hear a lot of your instructors tell you that you have to, in this day and age, be, in essence, kind of a jack of all trades and be competent at all kinds of various elements of journalism. I would add one more bit of advice to that, and that is it's okay to be good at everything. That should be your ambition, but try to be great at one thing. For me, ultimately, I had the benefit of being introduced to the craft of journalism at an age where it hadn't gotten to the point where it is today, where it's really very much in flux. In many ways, we're not really sure where it's all going. There are opportunities there for sure for bright, ambitious, opportunistic people, but a lot of it is still sort of out there, in the ether, and we're really not sure how it's all going to come out. When I started out, it was like almost a cradle-to-grave mentality. You could start at a newspaper or a television station and conceivably stay there the duration of your career. So things have changed radically. But again, if I were to insert myself in your situation, I would say that really what I was particularly good at and what I have tried to be better at over the years is being able to construct a cogent sentence and a cogent paragraph and write a decent news story. And just being able to articulate a story, being able to just write on a fundamental level has benefited me immeasurably in all kinds of different pursuits. So be good at everything. Be great at something.
And one quick point on that. I mean, it's a great industry. I love it. I think you would say the same thing. It's a very competitive industry as well, and an industry where you need to have some thick skin, because people will always tell you what they didn't like. You won't always hear what you did well, but they'll know your mistakes right away. So I think having a thick skin is extremely important.
Yeah, it is. I'm sorry, Joe. It is. It's a business where, you've heard the cliche, everybody's a critic. Everybody's a critic. And you have to very quickly learn, as David said, to just kind of like water off a duck's back. Everybody is going to have some sort of, suggestion as to how you can do your job better. And, it behooves you actually to listen to all of them, even the crazy people that come out of the woodwork. Because you never know. Somebody that you might think of in sort of a disparaging way, they may well have something really relevant to tell you that ultimately will improve your craft.
Anybody have questions? I can ask questions all day, but anybody just jump in, raise your hand if you've got specific questions. One thing we talk about in this class a lot is the changing media landscape, right? And that can mean a lot of different things. But when you think about that, are you ever concerned at all? Naturally, we know the argument that things are changing. You've got to keep up. You've got to do it these different ways, and we know that. We can talk about that. But sometimes we like in this class to talk about it. In some of the readings, we kind of reflect a little bit on: is this good for our country? The way things are going, is this good for journalism? Is journalism important for our country?
Well, I think, yeah, journalism is absolutely important. It's as relevant, if not more so, than it ever was. You know, a free society can't function without a fully informed electorate, and that's the role of the journalist. You know, we now live in an age where we're dealing with the blogosphere and where anybody in theory can establish a platform online and call themselves a journalist. And I think it's if there's a frustration in all of it, it's the fact that the average consumer of news today, I think, has a difficult time discerning between what constitutes news and what constitutes opinion. And sometimes people will intentionally proffer what will pass as news stories, but are in reality editorial pieces. So I think it really behooves the new journalist, you guys, to essentially establish and maintain a professionalism and to fully understand what's involved in the process, you know, how to be objective, and to embrace as sacred, literally, the notion that the public has a right to know, and they have a right to know their information in a very non-filtered way. I mean, you know, we now live in an age where you have media outlets that are flagrantly subjective. Fox News, MSNBC, they have agendas that in many ways, political agendas that they don't attempt to hide. You know, when I first started out, there was this mandate that you had to be objective and you couldn't take sides. I still believe in that concept, and I think it's essential that people coming up through the ranks today practice the notion of objectivity. The other thing, too, that I would just add, just as an aside, was, you know, I mean, Joe asked if anybody had any questions. You can't be a journalist without being curious. You have to be curious. ABC, always be curious. If you're not innately interested in other people or the world around you, you know, maybe you should think about going into industrial construction management or something. I mean, first and foremost, you have to be curious.
David Althouse, and do we have any curiosity here? Any questions? Keep thinking. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, shout it out. Yeah.
All right, this is for David Althouse. So, two kind of back-to-back questions real quick. Just kind of first, what's your favorite brand of camera? What do you usually use? What you prefer to use?
Okay, what's your second one?
And then the second one is, what's your favorite editing software? Which one do you prefer to use?
We shoot with a Sony PMW 350. It's a full-scale camera, about this long. I have a Fujitron lens, 16 by. It's great. It works out well. We edit on Final Cut right now. Final Cut's great. We are starting to learn how to shoot more on using the DSLR cameras, and that was a big push, which I tried to do with myself and somebody else this year. We wanted to learn how to do it, and the best way to learn was just to do it. So we challenged ourselves to do a whole half-hour special, and we did it on fast casual food. So we got these cameras, had 3 different lenses, and it worked out really well. Those were shot with Canon 5Ds.
Because I know DSLR, this generation especially, they're into this. Why is that? They like DSLR.
Because it looks good. It looks really good. It looks like film. It looks like something that you could shoot in Hollywood.
So you guys have good taste. That's great. Anybody here shoot on a DSLR right now? A lot of you have those. Okay. Any advice you'd give them just on shooting DSLR versus?
DSLR, you need 3 lenses.
Okay.
You need a wide, you need some sort of medium and a tight. And you need, it's like, I don't know if you've ever seen a photographer shooting a football game. They always have 2 cameras on them. They have a big one, which has a big 450 lens, and they have a little one to give the tight shots. And you got to alternate it, especially with editing, because you can't edit with medium shots.
Any other questions? That was good. Anything else? David? Did you ever think you were going to? Oh, here we go, right here. Sorry, I thought you were pointing at David. There you go. Let's go ahead.
So, what did you get involved in coming out of college, career-wise?
Which one?
2. Yeah, both.
Well, at CSU, I worked at the campus TV station for all 4 years. When I was in school, I worked for the Colorado Rockies doing the Jumbotron. Did that for 2.5 seasons. I went to every single game, shot all the games. and that was a great experience. It killed my GPA for about 2.5 seasons, but the experience was great. If Greg Luff's here, he would attain to that.
He is.
It's true. I had 2 internships in school. I interned at the ABC station in Denver, and the Channel 2 at that time was a different station. So internships, job opportunities, and here at CSU.
When I was going to CSU, I would say internships were essentially in their infancy, and the only internship I ever applied for was as a technical writer at the Naval Weapons Testing Center at China Lake, California, and I didn't get the job. And I wonder sometimes, had I gotten the job, what, I might still be up in the high desert, designing torpedoes and aerial bombs and stuff. No, so I actually spent 2 years at the Collegian, and in the context of how I refer to as the string theory, it seems like my career has been strung together basically by virtue of the people that I have met along the way. So I was working at the Collegian, and I was covering the Fort Collins City Council, and the reporter for the Coloradoan mentioned to me in passing one day when I was sitting at one of these meetings that she'd heard that there were a couple of job openings at a newspaper in Colorado Springs. So a friend and I, who also worked at the Collegian, went down to Colorado Springs immediately and applied for those jobs, and we got them. So I graduated on a Saturday and went to work on a Monday in Colorado Springs. The interesting thing was that I was hired on a 2-week tryout, and the person that hired me, the editor that hired me, quit the newspaper about the first day I showed up. So I was never officially hired. I just kept showing up,
Did you get a paycheck?
I did. That was the best part of it. I couldn't believe I was actually getting paid to do this. And so I was covering the police and the military by virtue of the fact that nobody on the staff wanted to cover the police and the military, and I had a great time. I actually got to go to Europe and cover NATO war games twice, and got to go all over the United States. I learned how to fly around in helicopters and fire machine guns and ride around in tanks, and had just a fabulous time. And then I was in Colorado Springs for a couple of years, and then I wound up getting a job at the Rocky Mountain News in Denver. And I was in Denver for a couple of years, and then I was offered a job at the Los Angeles Times. I started out in San Diego, where I also covered the military for the Times, and then was fairly quickly promoted to the main operation in downtown Los Angeles, where I lived for about 12 years. And it was in that time that I met people in the film industry and sort of morphed into a screenwriter. I also worked briefly as an associate field producer for the Los Angeles Bureau of CBS News, and really enjoyed myself doing that. I also met, again by virtue of my journalism, I met several guys that were Navy SEALs, members of the Navy Special Warfare community. And one of those guys wound up, after he left the teams, wound up going into working for a .com in Silicon Valley, doing essentially training videos for the government. And one day he called me up and asked me if I was interested in getting involved in their organization, and I said that sounded interesting, and so I wound up going to work in that arena. And then a few years ago, I just decided it would be kind of interesting to try my hand at novel writing, and I did that and was fortunate I found a publisher. So, again, back to what I said earlier, not to be too long-winded here, I mean, the glue that binds all of those endeavors together really is the fact that I know how to write a paragraph. If I wasn't competent as a writer, I don't know where I would be today.
Any other questions? I can always ask a lot of questions. I want to hear, enough of this, I want to hear some war stories, and you've got some real ones. But first, Dave Althouse, what's it like to be hanging out with the Broncos during the game? And we get a lot of Bronco fans here. Is that kind of what you want to know a little bit about? I find that interesting.
It's great. I'm not going to lie. I think I have the greatest job out there. I'll be leaving tomorrow to go to Oakland. It's a lot of work. It's intimidating at first, and then you just kind of realize, yeah, you know what? They're just normal guys that are big and wear shoulder pads. It's extremely professional once you're there. it starts from top down. I mean, John Elway runs the team, and he expects nothing but professionalism all the way down. And you see that from everyone there, and there's a high level, if you're covering the team, to kind of follow the lead on that stuff. It's extremely pressure. I mean, when I'm out shooting a football game, I don't want to miss a single shot. And once I'm done, it's just back to work and editing.
Well, I'm going to ask that tough question. I mean, what happens when you do miss the shot? I mean, you look over there and there's a big catch, there's a big some tackle, and you missed it, and how do you feel?
Oh, well, I try not to miss the shots. There's ways you can get around it, but you train yourself to be in the right positions, right time, right place.
You ever been run over? Because that does happen.
Not in a pro game. I've been close. Peyton Manning's record last year to Julius Thomas. Julius hit my ankle, and that was close. I thought that was going to be the end. I'm more concerned shooting high school games than I am pro games. High schoolers can't stop.
Okay. Yes, it was control. David Freed, you've been in a lot of situations. I don't know where to start. How about the LA riots? You were telling me some stories about that. It was basically an anarchic situation in Los Angeles, and you're in the midst of it. Riff on that.
Gee, I don't even know where to begin. Well, it was a very surreal thing. You know, the city was on fire basically for 4 days. I would say that probably my most profound memory of the whole thing was, I think it was on the third day, I guess it was the third day, my editor said, we need you to go down to South Central Los Angeles and see. There were rumors to the effect that all of the pawn shops had been broken into and all the guns stolen from the pawn shops. We need you to go down there and check that out. All right. So I go down there, and literally things are still on fire, and the tensions of the city were such that, you know, we were getting shot at, and our company cars looked very much like unmarked detectives' cars, so that would with an aerial sticking out of it, so that would kind of draw immediate attention. But anyway, we were driving. I was driving with a photographer south on Crenshaw Boulevard, and there used to be a soul food place on Crenshaw and Jefferson called Stevie's on the Strip, which was about my favorite restaurant in all of Los Angeles, and it was open for business. You could actually smell the barbecue from several blocks away, and as you came up on Stevie's on the Strip, they had one of those 55-gallon drum things where they were smoking, you know, ribs and stuff in there. So I said to my photographer, and the Chevron Mini Mart across the street was on fire, I remember. And I said to my photographer, hey, let's stop for lunch. And he said, I'm not getting out of this car. Are you crazy? And I'm like, yeah, but it's Stevie's on the Strip. We're right here, you know. So I persuaded him to pull into Stevie's on the Strip, and we walked in, and it was just bizarre. These guys were standing behind the counter, and it was like, can we help you? And, you know, so I ordered, they had these smothered pork chops that I thought were fantastic. So I ordered my smothered pork chops. And then when the food came, they had this little dining area outside on these plastic tables and chairs, and I went outside to go have my lunch, and my photographer refused to come out of the restaurant. Anyway, I just decided I wasn't going to be intimidated by the circumstances and the riots. So I was sitting outside eating my smothered pork chops, which were fantastic, by the way. And Stevie's on the Strip has since gone out of business. I don't understand why. I thought that place would be there forever. But anyway, so I was sitting there eating my lunch, and kitty-corner to me at another table was a woman, an African-American woman, sitting by herself, eating lunch as well. And I could feel her staring at me. I mean, you'd have to really appreciate sort of the things that were said to us when we were, you know, in the middle of the riots about basically get out of here, we're going to kill you, that sort of stuff. And I knew she was going to say something, and I was trying to ignore her. I was kind of girding myself at the same time, trying to anticipate what she was going to say to me. And she said, "Sir." And I turned and I looked at her, and she was holding up a pepper, and she said, "Would you like my jalapeno?" And I thought at that moment, it was sort of a metaphor for me about the whole riots. I mean, what went unsaid in that moment, this peace offering, was to me so profound that I can, you know, as I tell you the story today, I remember it like it was yesterday. But it was very weird. I mean, I would say too that like they started issuing us body armor. And at that point, I thought to myself, maybe I should think about doing something else.
It's funny how you mentioned food, because when you're out in stories, even like when you're driving around different places, you're like, I remember that place. There's a great Mexican food place there, but what were we doing there? And you're like, oh yes, that was a triple homicide.
Yeah.
It's funny how
you do sort of equate things. Yeah, absolutely, you do. Yeah.
Any questions? Is that what's kind of amazing about your job is that you're doing you're in these profound situations, and that they're so profound that the media would cover them. But in the midst of that, there's this kind of humanity that takes place as well, and you observe that as well, right? David Althouse?
Oh, without question. I mean, hey, we're people too. I mean, we're just happen to be the first witness to history or to the story or whatever it is. And it's kind of where you want to simplify it. And you just kind of get to a point where it's just a never day. I mean, it's a cool day, don't get me wrong, but it's...
Well, I was, when I was sent to the Middle East during the first Gulf War, I knew virtually nothing about Islam or Arabs. I didn't know the first thing about them. And it's interesting for me, the juxtaposition of sort of the common perception that a lot of people have today amidst, the rise of international terrorism, how, Muslims are this and Muslims are that. And my perspective was absolutely influenced by how I was treated by everybody when I was over there, from Iraqi soldiers. I had 3 guys pop out of a ditch one day and try to surrender to me, which I thought was kind of weird. No, you have to go down. See those guys down near those tanks? That's where you got to go. But after the shooting war stopped, the Shiite Muslims had basically attempted to overthrow Saddam Hussein, who was a Sunni. And after there was a ceasefire declared, the Shiites basically were trying to get out of Iraq, and a lot of them had fled south out of Baghdad along the Euphrates River. And my job for about 3 weeks was to basically drive up through Kuwait City every day through the highway of death, which maybe you've seen pictures of, and report on the welfare of these people who were literally fleeing for their lives and were basically car camping. Thousands, tens of thousands of them. It was just a surreal thing to see. And so I would go into the refugee camps, and these people literally didn't have the proverbial pot to piss in. But yet you'd go and talk to them, and the next thing you know, somebody would hand you a cup of tea and a little piece of pastry, or they would hand you a note and say, I have a cousin who lives in Los Angeles. Would you please make sure that they, to let them know that I'm okay? And I mean, it's just, I think that's one of the great beauties of being a journalist is you're on the ground. You're seeing things up close and personal. And I think it's, ultimately your job to sort of convey that humanity to people who are never going to get that opportunity. Whenever I've gone on assignments, I've always felt, however presumptuous it might be on my part, that like, look, the people that I'm writing for, the thousands or the tens of thousands or the hundreds of thousands of people that I'm writing for, they're never going to get this opportunity. They're never going to have the opportunity to sit in this tent, and talk to these people one-on-one and sip their tea and eat their pastry. And I have an obligation to try to convey what that is like for people that are never going to get that chance. And that's a pretty heady job.
David Althouse, you feel that is sort of the burden of that responsibility. You got to bring the story to people who can't be there.
Yeah, and that's the whole basis of journalism, is to transform your audience into where you are, and do it regularly. I mean, there's no off days a lot of times, weird shifts, and that's the thing you always have to remember, is that there's someone always seeing what we're producing, and you often forget about that. And it's great at times when you're talking to people and like, hey, I saw this story on the news last night, and they started describing it. It's like, yeah, you know what? I know that story. I did that story. So it's odd when that happens, but it's rewarding because you know that people are actually somewhat caring about what you do.
Any questions? Anybody have any? I kind of seeing hands roll around. Yeah, right there.
So you guys said that you have been in like a few pretty gruesome situations. Do you feel like you've been desensitized
desensitized to violence?
He's wondering if they're desensitized to violence from being in gruesome situations.
Yeah, that's kind of a profound question, and actually it was one that ultimately compelled me to leave the Los Angeles Times. I was doing a series of stories about the proliferation of gun-related violence in Los Angeles County. This was at a time when the crack wars were going full out in Los Angeles, and LA County, I think the year before, it had something like 1,200 homicides. So I decided that for purposes of research, I would spend the night in the LA County Coroner's office. And I would do a sidebar for my series about the last shooting victim of the old year and the new shooting victim of the new year, the first shooting victim. So long about 11:45, they wheeled in a member of a gangbanger from Boyle Heights who had been shot in the head. He was sitting on a porch in Boyle Heights, hanging out with some of his friends, and the shooter pulled up in a car with a deer rifle, of all things, shot him in the stomach. The guy fell over. The shooter came up, put the barrel of the rifle to the back of the guy's head, and blew off his face. So flash forward like 45 minutes later, an hour later, whenever it was, it's now about 15 minutes before midnight. I'm standing there in the coroner's office, and I'm talking to the coroner's tech as he's fingerprinting this dead kid. And I'll spare you the details of what it looked like, but it was pretty gruesome. And there were bodies stacked up everywhere. It's not like it's not like what you see in the movies or TV. It's what they pull drawers out and there are bodies in there. It's like there are bodies stacked up everywhere in various states of decomposition, and they wrap them like burritos in plastic. Anyway, so I'm talking to this this coroner's tech, and I don't even remember what we were talking about, but he's like fingerprinting this limp kid's hand on an ink pad and rolling his fingers onto a fingerprint card. They now do it digitally, but and somebody on the other side of the room, another tech, was doing the same thing to another body, and then somebody in the room said, "Hey, it's midnight. Happy New Year, everybody! Happy New Year!" And there was one of these big old kind of black clocks, those industrial kind of clocks, and I looked up and it was midnight. And everybody around the room was like, "Hey, Happy New Year, Happy New Year." And I was saying, "Hey, Happy New Year." And I just remember thinking to myself, I'm completely unfazed by this. I've seen so much of this that it's like, well, what's sort of wrong with this picture? That was the other thing that I had a difficult time ultimately with Los Angeles, living in Los Angeles. And I had 2 little kids at the time back then. You couldn't go anywhere in the city where you'd been at 2, 3 in the morning, and then you drive by there the next morning, where you'd seen just blood and guts, and it was as if it never occurred. People were going about their day as if, they lived in a place that was immune to violence. And it really got me ultimately to thinking about maybe I need to think about doing something else with my life. I had just become desensitized to the whole thing.
So you got on a helicopter and you flew to the Middle East?
No, that was actually that was sort of a little before that,
Okay.
And I saw some pretty amazing stuff there too, but.
The answer is yes. You do. And it's a tough business. It's a tough industry. There's lots of things which are awful. When you have to do a door knock on someone's parents or relatives or family who died and just try to get that soundbite. That sucks. It was tough I cover a lot of a trial for the theater shooting. And hearing that day in and day out, that's the tough part. You get desensitized when you get to the call of a body and canal. That's fine. But when you start hearing stories from people that it really affects, that's the tough part. And I can understand now why people get burnt out doing this business. It's great. I would do it every day if I could. But I fully understand why people get out of the business. Because it's tough. It's tough.
You had a question.
You had mentioned that you have to have like a thick skin in order to be a journalist. Was there any moment where you felt like you didn't have that yet, and so like anyone said something that really affected you, or you saw something that really affected you?
He's wondering, like, before they had the thick skin, how did they handle the situation? We've got about 3 minutes.
Well, yeah. I mean, I would be lying if I said my impulse when I get that kind of response to something is not, I'm going to hunt you down and punch you. I mean, that's kind of overstating it, but it's like, you know, now I write novels, and my books are reviewed all over the place, and it's always interesting, I think, to look at like reader reviews on like Amazon or Goodreads or something like that. You know, hey, look, my attitude has always been, I will attempt to synthesize objectively anybody's criticism. If it's well intentioned and if it's reasoned, I welcome it. It's sometimes it's the people that basically say things in a malicious way that you have difficulty trying to find anything redemptive about it. But you also have to recognize too, I mean, journalism is one of the few pursuits that I can think of, writing, shooting. You're holding your work up to public inspection every day. You're saying, I mean, think about that. How many other jobs does that entail? Maybe being an actor, maybe being a painter. I mean, most people go to work every day, and the only oversight that they're subjected to really is what their boss thinks of their performance, or maybe the customer that they interact with one-on-one. You're talking about potential feedback from hordes of people, and if you can't grow accustomed, and you're not going to please all the people all the time. So if you can't grow accustomed to the occasional person that basically says, you know, you suck at your job, or, you know, you have no business doing this job, and I've gotten those, then you really have no business being in the business, in my opinion.
You got to realize you're going to make mistakes, and you have to realize, okay, if I make a mistake, I'm going to learn from it. I'm not going to do it again. You learn quickly who you're going to trust. And if you trust somebody and find somebody that you can trust, you're going to learn, and you're going to listen to what they have to say. Life's not perfect, but one of the best things about in journalism is if I screw up today, you know what? I get to do it tomorrow, and I can make it better.
So do you feel that you had that, like, going into your career, you already had that thick skin? You already had that mentality of...
No, you learn it.
I didn't. No. I mean, people would say things, and I would be hurt. You know, but after a while, it's like anything, you know, you do it long enough, and it becomes kind of rote, and you're able to sort of compartmentalize those sorts of things. But really, that to Dave's point earlier, I mean, you absolutely have to grow thick skin, and just, you know, and recognize too that you're fallible and that you make mistakes, and try to do better tomorrow.
That's our time, but I want to give them something. These two have given us something that we can use for many years. And so this is for Dave right here. And what it is a nice glass mug. It's got a pewter ram on it. So they can use that. You know, we wanted to give that to them, something that they could use. And it says that we are proud for them to be a CSU Ram. And one thing I want to say is if I can channel all the instructors and professors you've ever had in your life, we are proud of you and what you've done, the respect that you give to this institution, the dignity based on your work. We really appreciate that, and I hope that someday one of you will be sitting up here at a panel like this and telling about some great experiences that you had in your life that you can share with us as well. So let's have a big hand for David.